Previously on Anton's pottery project. In my project, I will attempt to recreate aspects of the manufacturing processes of ancient Greek potters, particularly Attic red and black figure style pottery. I shall mine and refine my own clay. Then I will attempt to create my own vessels. I will then build a wood-fired brick kiln and attempt 3-phase firing. If all goes to plan, I should have created a modern masterpiece. But more likely, I shall have created nothing but a mess in my garden. Okay, project diary. So I am here at the earthworks. You can see we're about 2 meters below the original ground level, which is where they would have been mining for the clay. And you can see over there in the distance is the original kilns. So today I brought my exploratory equipment. We're going to take a look at just how clean this clay is already. So you can see here from just years of erosion on the bank, sediment build-up, that it's a sort of clay soil at the moment. So it's not pure clay, it's quite crumbly. So it's actually clean at the moment, and that's just because the brick kiln's 18th century, so these have been abandoned for centuries. You can kind of see the landslide over time. But what we'll do is I've got my digging equipment, and we'll see how clean this clay is. If not, that's part of the process. We'll create a slurry, we'll sieve it, we'll wash it and leave it to rest and see what we can make. Alright, let's go. Hi-ho! 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 If home from work we go. Hi-ho! 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 If home from work we go.
A few moments later.
Only a few centimeters in, but you can already see some of the marbling and the veining in the clay. So you have a less oxidized clay over here, which is the grey colouring, and then the orange is more oxidized, and that's what's going to give me that rich red terracotta colour that I'm trying to replicate from the Athenian pottery. So this is exciting. If I can isolate some of the grey veining, I can make a white slip, similar to how the Athenians would have created white. Let's just keep digging and eventually we'll get to some clearer clay. You can see the kiln over there in the distance. It's the first time this clay's been dug in at least over a century.
One eternity later. A few inches later.
This is brilliant. You're right. You can see why they've chosen this site. Because the amount of clay, it's incredible. I'm not even a foot in, and we already have near clear clay. I mean, there's some roots in it. I've seen a bit of chalk in one piece, which does suggest that it's not part of a vein or anything over there. So it suggests that this has been wet before. So we're still not even at the really undisturbed, clean stuff. But already, I'm really pleased with the quality of this clay. And this is before it's been refined. Topsoil has been scraped off. So getting deeper and deeper into the embankment now. and eventually I'll be able to sit my kiln inside there, and that will offer an extra layer of insulation. Anything that's not really very clean clay I'm throwing over here, which I'll then use as a cob mixture to mortar my bricks together. The only issue I've got is roots that come through, and they're pesky and they're very thick, difficult to cut through. I'm keeping my eye out for larger pieces of the grey clay, because I'd very much like to be able to isolate it and make a lighter slip, but it's just so finite that it's difficult to isolate. If you look, specks of grey all the way through it, veins of it. Very difficult indeed. That is an entire wheelbarrow's worth of nearly pure clay, broken up by hand, bit by bit, to make sure I go through it, trying to remove as much organic matter as I can, which is mostly roots, but also leaves. Pesky buggers break up very easily and attach to the clay. But the reason I'm trying to remove as much organic matter as possible is because in the firing process, obviously it burns away, and it causes shrinkages and crackage. Plus it can leave air pockets, which will cause it to expand and explode as well in the firing process. So it's about trying to purify the clay as best as possible by removing as much organic matter as I can, and that's why I've gone through it bit by bit, hand by hand, also stones as well. But grog, which is pre-fired clay, so terracotta or bits of terracotta pot is what I'm going to use, which is ground down very fine into a fine dust and mixed in with the clay. And the good thing about grog is because it's already been fired, it can't shrink anymore. So you mix it in and it stops the shrinkage of the clay and prevents cracks. Crikey, it's heavier than it looks. So next I've got to consult the ancient sources on how they would have harvested and purified their clay, how they would have mined it. Here I'm a bit on my own, because even in the Johns Hopkins University reenactment, they didn't purify their clay. They used manufactured clay, modern manufactured clay. I'm trying to mine my own, so I've made my life doubly difficult. So I'm going to consult the books, John Boardman's books mostly. There's a section in there called Tricks of the Trade, and that's had a few really good pointers so far on the actual throwing of clay. So I'm hoping they'll have something on the earlier stages. If not, I'll have to refer to modern techniques. I know there's some votive tablets that show the digging of the clay in wicker baskets as well, and then washing in pits. So I haven't got pits here, I've got buckets, so it's going to be a slow process. I've got old water tanks as well, which I might try and repurpose for the process. So fingers crossed. This here is my homemade filtration process, aka a hammock and a bucket. Yes, Marley.
Mum's son hammock.
Yeah, your hammock. So the idea is that this fine mesh will filter most of the impurities out of my clay. So I've got to mix it into a slurry. So I've got a handheld cement mixer and a mixing bucket. And so what we'll do is we'll slowly slurry up the clay with hose and tap water, and then pour it through this filter, and before leaving it to condense at the bottom. Should be interesting. What do you think, Marley? This is my first attempt at creating a clay slurry.
One week later.
What lovely Atticus screaming in the background.
Dogs barking, children screaming.
We dig, 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 in our mind the whole day through. To dig, 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 dig is what we like to do. It ain't no trick to get rich quick.
If you dig with a shovel or a pick.
In a mine, for a million times. Dig, 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 from earth in all your time. We dig, 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 up everything you find.
See this one
Oh, yeah.
through.
That's really cool. Amazing.
And that makes my slip. So this tank has been sat for 24 hours. And you can see a lot of the organic matter that is left in it that's come through the filter, the very, very small particulates, are all floating in the water now. Below, I don't know if you can see how clear the top layer of water is, for about a foot, because most of the sediment is now rested on the bottom of my tank. So what we need to do next is begin pouring and try and remove as much of the excess water as possible. Now I've got to collect all that slurry at the bottom. So I have this polymer piping which is modular, so it comes in segments, so I've made a complete ring out of it, and then I'll be placing my membrane over the top of that, and that allows it to soak the liquid away into the ground. I was originally using a clay mixing station, but the thing is it just acted like a bowl and nothing soaked away. It was sat in the liquid, so I'm hoping this will be a quicker process. Okay, so it's another vlog update. So far I've got 2 batches of clay that are drying outside in homemade clay pits, I suppose you would call it. This is today's batch, which is really liquidy at the moment, which has just come from the container, the tub. So I poured away all the excess water, which was filtered through the dram. It's a weed membrane, but because it's polymer, it means that I can scrape off all the clay, because I did try the linen sheets, but it's just a nightmare and it slows the process down. But anyway, so this mixture is really liquidy at the moment, and the second mixture, which was yesterday's batch, is starting to dry now. I've got it on a board which is absorbing a lot of the liquid. I've just tried to scrape it out to increase the surface area for evaporation, which is what their huge pits would have done. I'm pleased with the quality of it. There doesn't seem to be any roots or impurities that have gone through my filtration, so it's been really messy. It's taken a lot more than I thought, and it's been kind of ad hoc with the method as I go along. As the day's been going, I've just been turning it over, because otherwise it ends up forming a kind of a skin or a film across it that just traps the moisture inside. If I rub it between my fingers, because that's the test, I can't feel any grains. It is so smooth. It really has been filtered so well. I'm really pleased with the quality of it, and it's been mixed well as well, so it's all a solid colour. I didn't want any marbling, and the oxide levels in it are so high that actually it kind of leaves like a rusty colour wherever it's been left to dry. It leaves like an oxide powdering, even on my hands. So, there's another paw print in my clay. Who could it be, huh, Marley? First slab of clay.
Meanwhile,
Okay, vlog time. Unfortunately, the weather's starting to turn. Tonight, about 4 a.m, it's meant to start raining. So I've got to have it finished tonight because of the next week and a half. It's just pure rain. So the outside stuff's got to be done. Fingers crossed. This is where I'm at the moment. So I've still got the rest of the firebox to do. And then I've still got to do the incline of the kiln. So it should slowly start stepping in quite drastically now to make a sort of bottleneck.
Y'all ready for this?
Okay, so it is 5 a.m. and I have just finished my kiln with great help from my dad, and we've just had to tarp it all up because I don't know if you can see the clouds on the horizon over there. It's meant to start raining, but we're all set, we're prepared, and the kiln can just stay under there and dry for the next week while it continues to pour down. Pink sky in the morning. Shepherd's warning.
2 days later.
So, it has been, what, 48 hours since I was last here with my kiln. We wrapped it up in plastic, as you can see. A few puddles, but the storm seems to have passed. I'm worried because there was a hole at the top of sorry, there's a beer in my hand. I'm worried because there's a hole at the top, and then there was another hole on I put 2 layers of plastic. There was one hole and then another hole, and both of them lined up right in the damn middle where my kiln is. But I've tensioned the plastic with a few bricks, and so I'm hoping it's protected it. Okay, so that's the kiln. Next we're going to build the clay dome. And then we're going to try and fire it. Woo! The only issue is I've got the weather against me at the moment, which isn't good. But we'll work on it. I've got my tape measure, and I'm measuring the circumference of the top of my kiln so I can start to build the dome. Because that's the next feat. Got my trusty companion hay bents. 30 inches. That's what we're going to need to make the dome.
The importance of the dome is to harness convection currents. Athenian kilns would have been completely domed or circular in nature. However, mine shall simply just feature a cap, with the majority of my kiln being made of brick. Athenian kilns, however, would have been completely clay, of an akin nature to this. I built my kiln of brick due to convenience, but likewise the difference between Mediterranean and British climates. If I was to build my kiln with solely clay, it wouldn't dry in time, and likewise would suffer drastic cracks. I simply don't have the amount of clay available, or purified, or with grog, in order to build a kiln for myself. The idea here is that the sand template should be loose enough to be able to move as the clay shrinks, especially with the vent above that will be eventually forming part of the flue. The thin layer of paper in between shall also prevent the sand from sticking too much to the clay, or the ballast binding with the clay and thus causing more cracks.
So this is the dome. It's made out of raw clay. It's got a hole at the top so I can dig out the sand afterwards. I'm going to tidy up that hole now, the vent for the flue. But yeah, I'm rather pleased with it. I'm going to let it dry, and as it cracks I'm the clay's overly wet, so it is going to crack as it begins to shrink, and so I'm going to just work with it on there and press and fold out the cracks as they appear. But fingers crossed. So it's been a bit of a storm for like the past week now, but today it's really windy and really kicked it up, and it's halted all progress on my kiln. I've covered it in tarp as best I can, the actual brick kiln itself, and then also the clay dome to atop it. But it's not going to dry with the tarpaulin over. Even with the tarpaulin protecting it from the rain, the condensation that builds up in there is just collecting and keeping it moist. You see here, I've just had to weight it down with a few extra bricks, otherwise the wind keeps lapping at the corners. But we shall see. I finally returned to uncover my kiln. Now it's been covered for months now by 2 sheets of tarpaulin, and there's been nothing but thunderstorms and rain. It's been a really wet spring and a really wet early summer, and this has been the first week where we've had a sort of heat wave. So the past 2 days, it was only meant to last 2 days, for about 30 degrees, and I didn't think it was worth uncovering my kiln because it was meant to be thunderstorms straight after. So the weather's changed, and we're meant to have a straight week now of a heat wave with highs of 29, 28. So I've come up here and I've uncovered my kiln for the first time, and I'm really pleased with actually how dry the clay is kept, because I worried. I mean, look, it's basically, you can crack it into dust. It's not malleable at all. I was really worried that the plastic would actually keep in condensation and prevent it from drying, but it's really promising. So I'm going to cover it back up now, and then tomorrow I'll come and uncover it again, because it's the evening and I don't want the dew getting on it. But yeah, that's good news. My dome, though, unfortunately, my topping dome collapsed in the storms. It didn't survive outside with just simple tarp over it, and we're now short on time considering I had to input extenuating circumstances, and even with the extensions I've had to defer the project till the resit periods in August, and I'm still a full-time carer for both parents. But hey ho, so we're gonna have to see what we can do to cut some corners. I'm thinking now of purchasing a terracotta pot, but I'm hoping that if I can use that into my dome instead, and cut the hole at the top to then put my flue on, and then just a simple terracotta plate on top as a dampener, that it will have a similar effect, and then I'll just pile wet clay all the way around it as insulation, and we'll wait and see. Fingers crossed.
Here we're unwrapping my kiln to give it a final dry by lighting an initial fire in it. In principle, the kiln should work the same as an Athenian kiln with a large firebox at the front. However, it hasn't got the dome cap on it yet, but the cross drafts and updrafts should be enough for it to fire. You can hear the roar of the fire as the larger chamber behind creates a vacuum that draws the flames into the chamber. Likewise, the step of the kiln helps it enhance cross drafts and convert them into updrafts. Here you can see perfectly that the flames and heat are being drawn into this chamber. The small opening helps enhance the draw of the vacuum and focuses the flames. Short on time to make the grate that would separate my pottery from the firebox and chamber, I used shards of terracotta pot and sliced them into sections in order to then cross them over and weave them into a grate. I doubled up on the terracotta pots that form my dome so they're more insulated and stronger, as I didn't trust one not to crack. I also repurposed the bottom of the terracotta pots that I've used for my dome and flue. Let it move. Here, I'm attempting to make grog by grinding up old terracotta pot shards. As mentioned before, grog is to prevent cracking and shrinkage of my pieces when drying. Unfortunately, I made the mistake of working on the floor, which means the dogs have access to me. And yes, my dog is slightly pink from all the clay dust. Now I need to knead the grounded grog into my clay. This is the clay that I purified and mined myself. I was rather unsure how much grog to clay ratio I should be doing, but I was told to make the clay rather coarse. However, my clay naturally seems rather coarse already than you would find manufactured. After kneading the grog, we then began to start to work with the clay. We worked with pinch pots and coil technique, and successfully built my first amphora. To my enjoyment, the whole family tended to get stuck in. However, this might have been because I commandeered the kitchen table. Together, we were able to build several pieces. However, the rest of the family didn't seem to have the same patience that I did for the clay, with many of their attempted pieces being crumpled in frustration. Despite this, we persevered and were able to create several pieces, with one larger one that I was particularly proud of. But sadly, due to the curiosity of one of my dogs in the night, it wasn't to last. For designs and shapes, I continually referred to my books by John Boardman. However, I was obviously limited by my skill set, having never worked with clay before, and especially clay of this nature. Its plasticity seems to be lower than normal clay, and would crack easily whenever you try to mould or bend it. However, of course, the Athenian potters would have used wheels with a partner to spin the wheel for them. In place of a wheel, I used a lazy Susan, and attempted once or twice to try and spin the wheel with a partner. However, it proved too difficult to do without proper training. Instead, I continued with the coil technique, and successfully rebuilt my amphora. Here I attempted to build a kylix with both body and foot simultaneously. However, the weight of the foot proved too much for the body to bear. The ancient Athenians, according to John Boardman's book, would have built the foot in mass production, separate from the body, as well as handles and other features that would have been attached later once the clay was leather hard. This is why I was unable to build it in one go. Before being able to begin painting, I would first have to make my slips. I did this by grinding up dried clay of the several varieties I had and combining them with potassium from potash from my fireplace and oxides from rust, all of which I ground up in a pestle and mortar together and then added water to make a thick slurry type paint. This is known as slip. The oxides and potash imparted colour that was temporary to the slip, so I could see what I had painted. You have to remember that you're painting clay upon clay, and thus it can be very difficult to see what you're doing. We originally tried to etch our sketches onto the pots using the charcoal. However, it proved too difficult and wasn't achieving the finite details I would like. Instead, I turned to pencils, knowing that the graphite would also burn off in the firing process. For painting utensils, I used various materials that would have been available, including wooden splints, feathers, and my replication of a boar's whisker from my dog's whiskers. I was hoping the oxides would impart some colour to the slip, however the entire process has been rather ad hoc. I was unable to find any sources, ancient or otherwise, that were able to give me ratios for the slip. The ratios of potassium, oxides, etc. Scholarship tending to focus more on the practice and theory rather than the actual technical quantities for practical application. This is without mentioning that there are various different types of oxides. So I was simply painting and hoping for the best. Obviously, geologically, my clay would be completely different to that available in Greece, so I'd never be able to create an exact replica. Thus I put my focus onto the firing process. After finally loading my kiln, we then began to install the dome and flue, sealing the fixtures with wet clay to prevent smoke escaping during the reduction process. The flues were heavy but well secured, so I felt safe for the firing process. The taller the flue, the more draw the fire has, so we went as high as we deemed safe.
Go. 3 months in the making. Ready?
At this point I was rather emotional. This kiln had been several months in the making and had been the only downtime I'd had from my other responsibilities. Surprisingly, it had also been a wonderful bonding experience for me and my family.
You go back there. Oh wow.
With the kiln finally lit, I now had to gradually increase the heat to acclimatise the pots and prevent them from cracking. I set a timer for every half an hour and would return to the kiln to stoke it and apply more wood, burning dry timber for fuel. Eventually I would apply more and more fuel to increase the temperature. I would do so until eventually reaching around 900 degrees. This was over a period of around 6 hours. For guidance during this stage of the process, I was reading The Techniques of Painted Attic Pottery by Joseph Veitch Noble, and Athenian Vase Construction, a Potter's Analysis by Toby Scriber. Both gave detailed explanations as to the three-phase firing process, however lacked on details of timing and specific temperature reference points. To gauge temperature, I would judge by the colour of the pottery, with red indicating around 900 degrees Celsius, orange at around 1000, and yellow at 1150. It's here that I fear I may have overheated my kiln eventually, with my pottery looking almost fluorescent at points, near translucent and white with a reddish tinge. It was very difficult to gauge the colours they were referring to in the texts, as no pictures did the true colour of the kiln justice. With the kiln finally up to temperature, it was now time to start phase 2. I fed the kiln with high carbon fuels, using standard coal to produce smoke and carb, but also to maintain the temperature of the kiln during the reduction phase. We then used green timber, the moisture content from which would also create smoke and release carbon. It was this carbon that during the high temperatures of vitrification I hoped would seal the carbon in and turn the slip black.
Okay, so the kiln's been held at about 900 to 1000, so even at some points I think I've got it higher as about 1200 degrees, which means the vessel now is ready for stage 2, which is reduction. So wet wood has been put in and high carbon fuel, including whole green timber, which will burn slowly, produce high amount of carbon. So now the next step is to take the grass, damp hay, you can see here, as that will spontaneously combust but also dampen and produce as much and limit the oxygen supply to produce a lot of smoke. Hopefully seal the carbon in the slip, fingers crossed. So the first thing I'm going to do, I think, is throw on as much grass as I can, then run up to the kiln and seal it, and then build the bricks up in front. Moment of truth.
You can see the moment the hay began to spontaneously combust, as the flue above began to spit flames. However, I was too slow to get there and put the cap on before it started to gush full flames. So I had to be careful not to burn myself and used a shovel to slide the dampener across onto the top of the flue. This would rapidly burn the last of the oxygen in the kiln before putting the cap on. After closing the kiln, I then began to seal any leaks I found, using damp clay. After waiting an hour, I now felt they had been long enough for the kiln to be reoxidized. I could only hope they had continued to maintain temperature, and that vitrification had taken place with the carbon sealed. Upon opening the vents and door, reoxidization would cause rapid combustion of the dried fuel, and I hoped would reoxidize the body of the pot, returning it to a red colour.
Cooled down.
Is it black?
It's gone black, yeah.
Yeah, it has.
Yeah.
So it's 2 AM, we're leaving the kiln to reoxidize, hoping that the vessel will return to a red colour. Still a little warm. Yeah, it is. Okay, well, let's open her up and see.
There you go. Oh, come over there.
I think it might work, you know.
Show me.
I can't show you, Dad, I'm filming.
and get it out?
No, you have to get it out because you're standing properly. If you film, yeah. It's a nice spot there. Yeah. Yes, and it's coming out. Our last item. Don't break it. Okay, I got him. Black looking pot. There it is.
Yeah, that's everything now.